You're listening to Hungry for More, an Epicurean's Dilemma, and I'm your host, Trish Close. Master of Wine, wine sharer, Clare Tooley on the podcast today. And y'all, Clare understood the assignment. She not only answered my questions with so much heart, but she really let me in. She let me behind the curtain. We dug a little deeper in this interview, and I loved every second of it. I met Clare this summer in July at the Oregon Wine Experience wine competition. She was a wine judge. And it was fascinating watching her work, listening to her discuss some of these wines that are right in my backyard. Pretty incredible. When I met her, I knew there was a lot more I wanted to learn about her. British parents, she was born in Spain. She spent the first 7 years of her life in France. She talks about how magical that was. And really this lifestyle of moving around, which she did with her parents, she wanted to expose her own boys too. She talks about discovering wine in Notting Hill and how it led her down this path to the world of wine. She started her Master of Wine Studies in 2012, really as a way to get back to something that she loved so much and was so passionate about. A lot of really fun stories in this interview, but what I got out of it the most is that, yes, she says she's a wine sharer, but she says what's maybe more important than sharing is listening. Here's Clare Tooley. So exciting.
I'll watch my language.
Please don't watch your language. There's no fun in that whatsoever. Clare Tooley, I met you in July during this beautiful weekend of the Oregon Wine Experience wine competition.
That's right.
For those who know about this competition, we bring in 6 judges from around the country, around the world. Incredible judges, and you were one of them this year, and I was so excited. As soon as I heard your accent, actually, I was like,
so does that mean I can say anything, Trish, at any point?
You're joking. That's true though.
That's true.
I swear, if you're in America and you have an accent, you can say really whatever, and people are like, oh, that's so darling.
And what I find though, Trish, is that even to this day, so I've lived in the States now for nearly 9 years, and there's barely a week goes by when I don't say something, and there's a sort of slight kind of look of sort of curiosity or kind of blank, kind of what has she just said? Because I've used a word or an expression or that just isn't used here, and it doesn't matter how long I live here. I clearly we. The language is the same, and yet it's just not.
It really isn't. It's not the same. And thank goodness. Who wants to be?
Yes, I know.
Who wants it all to be the same? Barf.
I agree.
Clare Tooley, you're a master of wine, and I love on your Instagram you also call yourself a wine sharer.
Yes,
we're going to talk about master of wine for a lot of people. Like I kind of know what it means, but I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what. Sommelier, master sommelier, sure. Master of wine. Like, what does that actually mean? We're going to get into all the wine stuff, but first I want to get into the Clare stuff. I read that you were born in Spain.
I was.
Okay.
Yeah. So sort of randomly, my parents, both my parents are British, and my father was working in Spain at the time. He worked for an organization called the British Council, which basically meant that a little bit like the diplomatic service, would be moved from country to country every sort of 3 to 4 years. And at that point in his career, he was in Madrid. So that's where I was born.
Okay. How long were you guys in Spain?
My parents were there for 3 years, but I was born in that sort of final year. And so we moved pretty quickly from there to Paris. And so my parents were in Paris for actually nearly 7 years. And so that's where I spent my sort of early childhood. And I credit that to having a really, really happy childhood. My parents were supremely happy in Paris. They had a really wonderful experience there. And I think that was obviously transferred to me. And I think it's also clearly where I feel or felt most at home, and that's why I sort of subsequently, years later, took my own children back to France so that they could have a similar sort of upbringing, if you like, in a country that I love.
I feel like people who sort of live that way abroad, I guess, where,
Hmm.
maybe they were born in this place, but then they go away for college and then they go find their first job is in this town or a different city or a different country, or they go across the globe during college and they
Yes.
travel. I feel like you're a little bit more well-rounded versus someone who maybe lives in the same town like their entire life. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know about that. What I know for sure is that it certainly had an impact on me
Mm-hmm.
growing up in another country, having a second language that came very easily and naturally because that was just, children pick up so quickly, and
Right.
it was never a struggle. But that sort of idea of communication and finding ways and understanding that there are different languages to use, different expressions, and just different habits, and that is great, and that's what makes life so exciting. And I know it had a huge impact on me, and I know that it's the reason why I've had sort of this wanderlust ever since. That whilst I sound very British, and England is home as such, it's actually not. Home is really wherever you create it. And that idea of having an opportunity to see the world and live in other places, and meet people you'd never meet if you just stayed at home. It's that's what's so exciting. So having that opportunity was something that I don't take for granted, but it was something that I really wanted. As I say, I wanted my children to have a similar wanderlust, if you like. So have moved them to three different countries as a result.
I
They
love
they
that.
they don't want to go anywhere else. So now they're happy in America.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I grew up in South Carolina and I moved to Las Vegas when I was 16.
Right.
And that was brutal. That was really brutal for me as a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
But looking back, I'm really happy that again, I did that because it really did broaden my
Sure.
horizons. It opened my eyes to a whole different world out there. So,
Sure.
yeah, no.
Yes, you learn a lot about yourself as
You
well in the
do.
process. That much I'm convinced of as well. And
Yeah,
learning your sort of your place in the world, and that's also part of it. But we're so fortunate, our generation, to have that opportunity, and to be able
hmm,
uh, to travel, and for it not to be, for it not to be considered anything other than a right, a rite of passage to be able to move around. I think is something that let's say I don't take it for granted, but it's absolutely something that I believe in.
for sure. And I love the home is where the heart is, right? So that's
Oh,
where,
for sure,
yeah.
for sure, yeah,
So,
absolutely. And you create that home wherever they were, and that's exactly what my parents did. So they moved around a lot, but wherever they were was home to me. Didn't matter. And they went from France, they went to Mexico for 4 years, they lived in Poland for 4 years, they lived in Belgium for 3 years, and so all of these different places were home.
fantastic. I'm always curious about the family life. Was food important? Was gathering around the table important?
Um, yeah, oh, yes, it was, definitely. Um, Wine, it's funny, I sort of fell into wine, but now when I look back, um, there was always wine on the table. We didn't talk about wine particularly at home. My parents enjoyed wine, but they never sort of labored it, and it was always part of a meal, part of the entertainment. It wasn't something that they spent a lot of time discussing.
Mhm.
But obviously, because of their travel and because of their work, actually, there was a lot of entertaining, a lot of parties, a lot of lunches, a lot of dinners. So I think wine was always part of that, and obviously so was food and entertainment, really hospitality.
Right. That's so funny.
Mm.
Same here. I mean, just always, and really it wasn't so much entertaining as like, come on in and have and fix a plate and sit down,
Right.
for a family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
Yes.
I love that idea that, food was always very important and wine, my parents never talked about wine, but they drank wine and wine
Yes.
was something very interesting to them. So then it sort of became
Yes.
interesting to me.
Exactly. exactly. And also, I suppose, living in France, for example, it was traveling to the different wine regions and sort of, enjoying the bottles, literally sort of that had been, that had come from the adjoining vineyard or village or what have you. And so I suppose that was something that clearly I had in my childhood. But wine, I never considered the wine industry as a possible career. I mean, that came really out of the blue, but later, you know.
So I read you went to Clare College, which I just think is
Yes.
so lovely. um,
It's one of the oldest Cambridge colleges. Yeah.
yeah, it was founded in 1326. I looked this up.
There you
Second
go.
oldest surviving college of the University of Cambridge.
That's
Wow.
right.
Would
Yes,
you?
it's beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it looks stunning. What'd you go to
Mhm.
study?
Oh, modern languages. So French and Spanish. So a little bit of a cheat there because obviously I had I'd had an experience of living in both countries. So but it was very much a literature based degree,
Okay.
which I loved. So a lot of reading, a lot of writing, and that's still to this day something that I would love to find time to do more of. But certainly that sort of literary based as opposed to language based.
Yeah, I've read a few of your I don't know if they're like necessarily blog entries. It was on timatkin.com.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
he's very kindly published um, things that I write. Yes, I have written, and I wrote for a little while for Decanter magazine as well, which was a real honor. And I write when I'm inspired. Wine, again, wine and actually just life in general has so many moments of what I call clarity that allow you to perhaps express yourself in a way that um, uh, or encourage you to express yourself in a way that is uh, different from your day to day.
Yeah. Tequila does that for me. Lots of clarity with tequila.
Yeah, but that's unwritable.
Yeah, there's a quote
You don't
everybody
always want to capture that, not for posterity,
right,
Trish.
right, right, right. There's a quote everybody says came from Hemingway, but it wasn't. It was a fictional character. He said write drunk, edit sober, Ernest
Right.
Hemingway. And I just, obviously he
What are you suggesting, Trish?
drink more wine and write more, Claire. No, but I do
There we
think
go. All
you're
right,
right.
thank you. I'll take that away in heart.
Right? There
I'll
is
take it to
something
heart.
when you have right when you have that like first few sips of wine,
Oh, for
everything
sure.
just kind of like opens up and mellows
Oh,
out,
oh,
right?
absolutely, absolutely, it does. And that sort of relaxation process, that sort of allowing your mind to wander a little, allowing your sort of senses to, oof, to
Yeah.
expand.
Yeah.
Yeah, is
Okay. So when did you discover wine? When did you get bitten by this bug?
um, I would say that it was in my 20s, and I had been working. I'd left university, left Clare, with this sort of wonderful and useless literary degree, and worked for a violinist, actually, for a musician. So music is my other passion, and thought that I could go somewhere, in the world by being a sort of an assistant to a musician. And so I worked for him for 18 months or so, and realized that whilst he was traveling the world playing his violin, I was sat back in a sort of tiny office on my own, and that really wasn't quite what I'd imagined. So I answered an advertisement in a newspaper for a wine job, well, with a wine merchant, but really all they wanted was someone who could type and someone who could speak French.
Oh.
So it was a glorified secretarial position. And I walked into the offices, which were in Notting Hill in London, and couldn't quite believe my eyes. There was this quite bohemian sort of style loft office, and this huge tasting slab that had what looked like hundreds of bottles. There must have been about 50 or so open bottles of wine, and they had obviously been tasting, but it was towards the end of the day, and one of the winemakers was there, and there was this sort of heady atmosphere of a wine tasting that had obviously been brilliant. It was a Burgundian winemaker, and I kind of thought, gosh, this is a party. Is this real? Is this a job? Anyway, I started with them, and to be honest, probably didn't get the bug immediately. Got the sort of bug for the lifestyle and the idea that there was actually more to it than that. That there was a business element to this, and that there was a selection process in this, and there was a relationship business going on here, that you create relationships with suppliers, with winemakers, with regions, with vintages, and so forth. And so bit by bit, I began to realize that this had so many facets to it. And where I was so fortunate looking back was that they were very generous with me as a young woman in the wine trade in London, with a emphasis on classic regions, France specifically, that was still very pretty male dominated. Yeah. The company that I worked for was all about empowering younger and female, which is what I am, to learn and to establish myself, and they taught me. They were generous with their time. I was allowed to travel. I tasted everything. I learned from them. And so looking back, I think that's clearly where it started. And I can't imagine doing anything. I have done nothing since then other than work within that industry.
What do you think? What is it about tasting wine? Not so much like drinking a bottle with dinner, but when you have this flight in front of you, or open bottles in front of you, and you have this person pouring you this little, drop to sniff and taste and spit if you want to. What is it about that? It's just so sexy to me. It's romantic. It's beautiful.
It's very intimate.
It is.
It's very intimate. And I think that's the secret. It's a gift, but it's also inviting you personally, intimately, to create this dialogue with the wine and the person sharing it with you. And I think that's the it creates a bubble. For sure, it's a privilege. We all know that it's a huge privilege, but it's an invitation. It's an invitation to you to allow your senses a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes outside of your everyday existence, to question yourself. What is it that I'm seeing? What is it that I'm smelling? What is it that I'm tasting? But also, and this is where it gets really sexy, what is it? How does it make me feel? What does it make me remember? Where does it take me? Where does it, and that I think is where, certainly for me, the fascination. And what I love, Trish, is I've been doing this for a long time. I'm very old, and I have tasted thousands of wine, and I still get a thrill from it. I still do.
That means you found the right spot for you.
I did. How lucky am I?
Right?
I know that.
I feel the same way. I feel the same way when you find something that you're good at, when you find your niche, right? I just feel so lucky because so many people don't.
Exactly. I know that. I see it every day. And that's not to say that every aspect of what we do, you and I, we don't enjoy everything. It doesn't always go right. It doesn't always feel comfortable. It doesn't, I've had a lot of failures along the way. I've had a lot of challenges. But if you know that fundamentally you're within a sphere or a world that is something that you respond to, but that you're also you're still curious about, that you still want to know more about.
Right.
Because let's face it, with wine, you're never going to know everything, never. And that's perfect. That's perfect for me.
I love that. So John Armit Wines, you signed
Yes.
on to work with them in
That's where I started.
1995.
Correct.
What were you doing?
Well, as I say, I was typing up a lot of French. I was actually classifying people's cellars. So John and Sarah, Amanda and Susie and John, who ran the business, they had a portfolio of wine lovers, wine collectors, and they managed those portfolios for them, for their cellars. So they did a lot of giving advice on purchasing,
Okay.
turning them over, and so forth. So I did a lot of administrative work, but John and his team it was very small. There were only 8 of us. It was a tiny group. He was always very very curious about the next great regions in the world. So if you can imagine, back in the 90s, London was a real center and hub for very classic regions: Burgundy,
right,
Bordeaux, Champagne, and the sort of so-called New World, and regions that were beginning to sort of find their own expression on the international stage, came to London because they recognized that London was this sort of hub, if you like,
right.
that it was a hub within itself, but it also had this international platform. It was also selling to Hong Kong, to Singapore, to America, and so forth. So we had a lot of suppliers, winemakers, who came to us with their wine. So Angelo Gaia, for example, came to John first with his wines, and so John was one of the first in London to bring the Gaia wines to the market. In California, obviously, Opus was beginning, but also Christian Mouex was launching his Dominus wine there, and so bit by bit, John was very much, what I witnessed was this opening up. Looking back, and it's easy to say this with hindsight. At the time, I probably wasn't. I certainly wasn't that conscious. But looking back, I realized that what I was witnessing was this expansion, and again, this idea that other wine regions had gone from emulating the classics to actually finding their own expression and their own feet, and sort of launching themselves into a wider market. And obviously that had happened, that was happening in the 70s and 80s for sure, but I think the 90s were really a time when there was a lot of money being spent on wine. For example, Robert Parker with his scores was huge, and so that sort of development, I think, was something I witnessed. But I moved from there into actually a very different type of business, which was more the everyday drinking wine. So sort of less of the esoteric and fine and premium, and more of the everyday, with a company called Laithwaites. And so that was a move that I was fortunate to have an opportunity to become a wine buyer, but also opened up my palette and my sort of my expectations about the fact that, well, all these more premium luxury wines were all well and good, but what was the everyman drinking or the every woman,
Yeah.
And how exciting to go out and explore regions that were much less well known, that were not aspiring to make $100 bottle wine, $300 a wine, but we're making the everyday, and bringing that to more people.
Was that a pretty hefty transition for you, or did you fall into that naturally?
It was a change. Again, I was still pretty young and inexperienced in many ways, so it was exciting. I'd started my family during that time, which actually was challenging because I was having to travel.
Yeah.
And so looking back again, it was an exciting time. I was always on a plane. Well, it felt like that. I was given South Africa as one of my portfolios, so I got to go to the Cape and buy wine from extraordinary regions there. But I was also beginning to juggle early motherhood as well, and so that was it was quite a difficult time, actually, looking back at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, when you look back, you also think, how in the hell did I do that? How did I do all that? Right?
I know. I know. I have no idea. Actually, looking back, I have no idea. Well, I do know I had a lot of help from a great husband, but no, you just get on with it. I think if you're driven, you're driven, and that's
you just
it.
Get on with it.
Yeah, just get on with it. Yeah.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
You really do. You just get up the next morning and go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, for sure. When did you decide you wanted to be on this path to, I guess, the education path, the wine education path that so many people crazily start?
You know what? You have to be a little bit mad.
You do. Yeah.
So ironically, I decided to start that pursuit when I realized that I had moved too far away from what I loved doing. And so by that stage, I had, I'd been promoted. I had more responsibilities. I was more involved in management and strategy and spreadsheets and, meetings, and much less involved with the product itself, much less involved with wine. And that's when I realized I wasn't very happy, and that it wasn't fulfilling me. It was a demand. I was demanding what I was doing, but it wasn't really what got me buzzing, really got me going. So I thought naively that if I went into the MW program, that would sort of, that would bring the spark back. It would give me an opportunity to learn. It would give me an opportunity to taste more wine and talk wine, and, and of course it did all of that. Mm-hmm. Of course it did, but it was also, it was really hard. Yeah. And I don't regret it, but it was, the first step was more to do with what I thought would be bringing me back to something that had more pleasure and personal inspiration. And then it turned into, of course it turned into a complete mission and years.
Yeah.
Years.
Well, tell me if these dates are right. You started studying in 2012?
Yes.
And you got your Master of Wine certification in 2021.
Yeah, thanks, Trish. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
it was,
I'm not a math major, Claire, but
right. It was a lot of years. More importantly, it was a lot of wine and a lot of tasting and a lot of writing and a lot of soul searching, actually, eventually, because obviously along that way, it's exam based, obviously, and clearly I failed more exams than I passed along the way. So, and I was working full time, and I have my two beautiful children as well. So it was a long road, and obviously I kind of got there in the end in terms of passing it, but it was a lot more than it was a lot more than I'd ever imagined, for sure. But of course, once I'd started,
you can't stop.
There was, you've got to finish.
You've got to finish. Was there ever a moment where, was there ever a moment where you're like, what am I doing? What am I doing?
Oh, yes. Oh, not just one, Trish.
Lots, yeah.
Multiple moments. But I think if you ask anyone who has studied for these sorts of certifications, I imagine the answer would be the same. Yes,
Yeah.
there are absolute moments of why am I doing it? I
Right.
think that was more, it was more not what am I doing, it was why am I doing it? You have to remind yourself why. And sometimes the why changes along the way, but either way, you have to take the time to, when you're at that sort of lowest point, um, remembering the why
What was your why?
is important.
What?
Well, the why had started because I knew that I wanted to come back to something, to come to rekindle the sort of passion I'd felt at the beginning, and then as I went along, it was more to do with why am I doing this? Well, because I'm learning, and even though I'm failing on at certain moments in an exam situation, the reality is that I know so much more now than I ever did. I'm so much more enthused by it. Actually, I'm in a position, hopefully, to convey even more of that outwardly. And this sort of idea of sharing is something that's quite important to me. So why am I wanting to get to this level, if you like? It's because I believe it to be a standard, a gold standard within the industry, and I would like to be good enough to be at that, and so that the industry, or so that wine itself can be taken seriously.
Do you
you know
also think that speaking of sharing, that you have certain strengths, right? That while you're doing this, while you're in this world of wine, your strengths, right, are pushing certain things forward. Speaking of sharing, you do have
yes.
so much knowledge. And, I'm just thinking back to the judges forum,
Mm.
some of the questions that you answered, you could see people in the audience going like, aha, the light bulb. So here you are sharing, right? Which is
Mm.
what you're very, very good at. I just always think that passion and
Mm.
strength should go right next to each other as we move forward.
And yes, and well, thank you, and that's a real compliment. And I think that it's about discipline, though, as well,
Mhm.
Trish. It's about, when you start on any studies or anything that requires this sort of level of concentration and focus, then it also requires a personal discipline. And I think that again is something that maybe spoke to me, that it gave me a structure, it gave me an ability also to put things into perspective. So my work is one thing, and that's very important, and it can be all consuming, but shouldn't be, and should never take precedence over my personal life, my family, but neither should my desire to sort of improve my mind, to learn more, to expand, and what you find in the program itself, in following something like the Master of Wine, is that it's about the people you meet. It's the ability. It opens the doors to conversations, to questions. You find yourself asking questions all the time, and there's nothing. Much as I love to share, there's nothing better than sitting listening to someone who's informing you, and who knows something that you didn't know before, and you're I love that. I love sitting and listening to bright, impassioned people
Mhm.
who are sharing their experience, their wisdom, their knowledge with you, and you take that and start putting it together with everything else that you've learned and listened, and you start to get this sort of glorious big picture. I love that. And that was what the program gave me, as well as lifelong friendships, um a sort of passionate dislike of pinotage to taste a lot of different wines, and I've definitely come out with some I just can't, not my thing.
Okay, pinotage is
It's a
one.
little
What's
rude.
another? What's another?
I shouldn't have started this, should I?
This is the good stuff.
It's well, no, it's just Carmenere is another one that I'm not a big fan of. But that's not fair. I again, what the program does is that it insists that you open your
Yeah.
mind to everything and that you give everything its fair time and space and learning, because the world of wine is so diverse and so rich and so colorful,
It
you know.
really is. It really is. I love that. I think we could probably have a whole another podcast interview on listening, because I feel like most people aren't very good anymore at listening,
Mm,
because it's a job. You really do
yes,
have to focus. You can't think about what you want to say next. You have to really be present in the moment
yes,
and
yes,
focus on what the person is saying. And I really do feel
yes.
like as a journalist, that's my number one job, is not to come up with great questions, is to listen.
Mm, yes, and to remove your battle with your unconscious bias at all times
All
in order
times.
to really be able to listen. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. No, I agree.
I mean, I'm basically a master of wine. It's like the same thing.
Yeah, that's right, Trish. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. No, I do love that. And congratulations on Master of Wine. I just feel like,
Well, thank you.
I mean, I know, like, again, this much on the studies, and it just blows my mind really more why you guys continue
Yeah,
and keep going. It's
yeah.
like, oh my
Well,
goodness.
we're it, I remember someone saying to me, just be tenacious.
Hmm.
Nothing in life is worth nothing you believe in necessarily comes easily.
Right.
Nothing that you give real value to,
Mm-hmm.
and that's with your relationships, with your passions, and so sort of holding on to it and following it and pursuing it and trying to get to be really good at something. It's something that I think all of us, if we're fortunate, is, as I say, I consider it a privilege.
So getting back to, you said music is one of your other loves and passions. Do you play or?
I used to.
Okay.
I used to play the piano. I used to sing. I used to play the oboe. But I do none. Well, I still sing in sort of quietly in the shower.
Yes.
My one of my brothers is an opera singer. So and his all of his children are very musical. So I have nephews who all perform. But yes, music was. I did think briefly, as I say at the beginning of when I left university, that was probably a world that I would like to
Mm-hmm.
be involved in. I'm very glad that life took me in a different direction. I'm very glad that I went to wine.
Were your parents musical?
Yeah, yes, yes, but again, sort of uh, amateur musicians. But
Okay.
my mother always sang. So so all around the house,
I
and
love
well,
that.
you'd always know when she was particularly happy because she'd be in the kitchen singing, and
Oh,
and I can hear her. I can in my memory I can hear it now. Yeah, and she had a really beautiful sort of pure soprano voice, very very pure, very clean, and she was always singing.
I love that. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. My grandma sang in the church choir, which she
Yes.
absolutely loved. And we joke as a family, she wasn't the best
Right.
singer,
It doesn't matter.
but she sang the loudest, which is what I love the most. I love that
Yeah.
so much that she
Yeah.
just got up there
Yeah.
and sang her heart out, and she
Yeah.
just she
That's
just
her
sang.
expression.
Ugh,
Yeah.
love it so much. I love it. No, I love singing. I've played the piano a little bit, and I was in
Yes.
choirs and like performing groups my most of my younger life. And so yeah,
Yes.
I am a shower singer,
Right. Yeah.
hardcore.
Oh, absolutely. Car. And in the car, I sing a lot in the car,
Yeah.
really loudly, actually,
Mm-hmm.
because no one can hear me. And that's when I drive sort of away from work, or
Yes.
away to work, but when I'm away from work, that's my sort of, the radio goes on, and
Yeah.
the volume goes up, and
I
my
sing
own
really,
karaoke.
yeah, I sing really loudly until I'm at a stoplight, and then it just kind
Yes,
of.
yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about this move to California, because this is kind of where you've settled, right? You have settled. You're
Yes.
done
Well,
for now.
you say, never say,
Never say
never
you're
say
done.
never.
Okay.
So yes, we moved here. It'll be 9 years. 9 years next week, actually.
Wow.
Extraordinary to think of. I know. I can't quite get my head around the fact that we've been here so long. Again, wasn't really the plan. The plan had been to be here for 2 years. That was the contract I had with the company that I was working with at the time. And then I got sort of hijacked a little by my family, but by my children, and in fact by my husband, who said, actually, we really like it here, Claire. Why don't we stay? Why can't we?
Nice.
Why don't we think about staying a little longer? And then, of course, had to go through the whole process of the green card and so forth, which we fortunately got, which then obviously secured a longer term future here. And my sons are now, one's at college and one's at high school, and finishing at high school. And so they're set, they're set here. And I can't imagine, we won't move them again for sure. And I can't imagine moving too far away from them. So yeah.
The high schooler, is he a senior?
He's a senior. Both of them actually are just going into their senior year. Yeah.
You're going to be an
I know.
empty nester.
I know what you're going to say. Don't, Trish. Don't make me cry. It's very much on my mind.
So our kiddo left the house. He came back. So
Right.
there is that. There is the potential that they could come back. I didn't think it was going to be as hard as it was. I'm not going to lie.
Oh,
it was brutal.
I'm sorry. I've been through it obviously once, with Lawrence going to college 2 years ago.
I'm telling you.
Just a lot.
I mean, waterworks for days.
Yeah, it was tough, and of course, you know that they're doing exactly what they should be doing, and you're immensely proud of them. And frankly, you should be proud of yourself, Trish, that that you got them there and that they left, and But yes, the idea of going through it again, and then clearly I should have had about 5 or 6 kids.
Yeah, I will say,
always have one spare,
right. One, just a spare, just lying around. I chased the rental van when my parents dropped me off at college. I chased it. I mean, I was just, right. I'm such a mama's girl, and I was just devastated. But I mean, like you just said, it's just so good for everybody. It's just such a good process.
Of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, we should take pride in that. I don't know why we beat ourselves up about things so much. We should be immensely proud and celebrating, and frankly also realizing that you've got time back for yourself.
Yep.
Really, I mean, clearly they will. Hopefully, they will always come back, and they will always need you, and there will always be opportunities. Hopefully to be very much a part of their existence, but also it's an opportunity to sort of again come back to maybe a few things that are important to you, whatever those are, whether that's
absolutely. Absolutely. So are you still writing? Are you writing currently?
I have I yes and no. I have I always have something. I always have something on the go. It's never very good. so I sort of, it takes a long time for me to, well, I say it takes a long time for me. So, sometimes, the inspiration comes and I write it and it's done. And I do have an ambition to write a book. I know everybody does. And I know that one shouldn't necessarily put it out there unless one is going to do it. But I would like to do that, and it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time. So there's that sort of in the background. but I'm very busy. I have a full-time day job, which keeps me very, very busy. And so the writing is a little on the side
Well,
for now.
I just want to read this really quickly because I found this again on timatkin.com, and you just wrote it in July of this year. But I just want to read a little quick thing to you. We turn to wine for a myriad of reasons: in communion, both sacrosanct and social, in celebration, to mark wars, and to make peace. Some of us use it as the vehicle to write. It is a relief, often from the chaos of our existence, an elixir that shrinks the big picture to color the tiny pixelations of our personal pods. Never, however, it seems to me, has wine writing offered such an opportunity to expand our minds if the words we use are powerful enough. The whole universe is indeed to be found in a glass of wine. May we find the words to do it justice. I mean, I read that and I got goosebumps again. There's there's such beauty in that, and I felt a connection to it instantly. So if you're thinking about writing a book, just maybe go for it.
Oh, listen, thank you, Trish. That's again, huge compliment. Thank you very much. I was inspired to write that. I tell you why. I'd just come back from Germany, where I had been attending a symposium. It was actually Institute of Masters of Wine symposium in Wiesbaden, and it had been very inspiring. It was a few days of going back to what I said before. It was a few days of being able to sit and listen to extraordinarily intelligent, articulate people talking about various aspects of the wine industry and various experiences that they were living through, including a very moving presentation from a lady from the Ukraine who was, presented to us the sort of devastation of their country and the vineyards and so forth. And so that was very moving. And then there were many other wonderful speakers. And I think I was inspired by that experience of wine being global, for a start, being so connected with so many aspects of our existence. It's not just alcohol. It's a social, it's a piece of history. It's a piece of social interaction. It's a vehicle that's used in marketing, obviously, for all sorts of aspects of communion. It's also the canary in the coal mine in terms of the climate and climate change. It's something that is impacted heavily by that. So many aspects, right, Trish, that I sort of thought, gosh, there's a lot here. There's a lot to write about. There's a lot to communicate about, and I think that was what I found very inspiring. And then fundamentally, it's also for me always a very intimate, very personal moment of truth and clarity and celebration and mood enhancing and privacy as well. Like I associate wine with my privacy as well, my moment.
Absolutely. I think too, writing when you're inspired like that, I know I feel I have to get it out like right now.
Oh, yes. Right? Oh my goodness. It's physical, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. It
really is.
Your brain is filling up with words and phrases, and it's like, I can't find something fast enough to write it down with. And you have to get that out. I mean, it's so important. It's therapeutic and all of those other things.
But absolutely.
If you have the gift of words, you should share it. Yeah, absolutely. I have to ask you, how did you, and you can be honest, you don't have to I'm just kidding. Not that you were
honest.
Not on.
How honest. I'm pretty candid.
I know. That's my favorite thing about you, honestly. I love candid people. Just give it to me straight. Oregon Wine Experience, the competition, for real. How did you like it?
I loved it. Not a moment's hesitation in my answer to that. I found it was not what I was expecting. So I always love that about. I love the unexpected. So that was part of it. I was on multiple levels. I think it's important for me to express how grateful I was for the organization of it. So it was seamless. We were the handling, the presentation, the way the wines were, that piece of it, Trish, was extraordinarily well executed and really professional. So I really admired that, and I really appreciated that. And then on the wine front, just this sort of, glorious selection of wines that I know Oregon produces some extraordinary wines. Of course I do. And that was one of the reasons I was, so grateful to be asked to judge, but I don't think I was expecting anywhere near the sheer diversity. Yeah. And that's exciting for anyone, regardless of where you are in your sort of journey in wine, to know that there are some really ambitious, driven winemakers out there who are creating deliciousness for us.
I know. I love that. I interviewed all the judges after the competition, and one of the things you said that I actually put in the video, I loved it so much. You said there's a fruit purity to Oregon fruit, and you said it's this big sky, blue sky, and I just I was talking with someone, I'm like, that's it, because I've been trying to figure out what I love about Oregon wine, and that's it. It's this, like, it's just pure and beautiful.
Yes, fresh air, direction, and we can get technical about it. That's clearly to do with the ripeness and the acidity levels, and then the sort of management of that in the vineyards and so forth. But what it boils down to in the glass and the sensation is it is this very sort of this very clean, very pure, very focused energy. And I love that. I love that about great Oregon wine. I think it's a hallmark for sure. And bear in mind that I've sort of spent years doing this sort of awful masochistic type approach to wine tasting, which is everything's blind. So you're really having to kind of drill deep to work out what it is that you're tasting, and then work out what that means to you, and map that in your mind as to what that could therefore lead you to believe the wine has come from, where it's come from. So yes, I spent far too much time doing that, Trish.
No, I have to tell you, this is my second competition that I've worked. And for those who don't know, I do a lot of work with Oregon Wine Experience, and the competition this year, I got to sit in and take lots of video of all of you guys sipping and spitting and note taking, and
we must look like madmen.
No, Vincent was the one who was just spitting and spitting and spitting. And I told him later, I'm like, you spit a lot. A lot.
A lot.
The discussion was my favorite, though. Listening to you guys discuss these wines that, some are in my backyard. I'm like, this is so cool. It's just really cool to listen to.
Yeah. And to live in a region that produces wine is a real blessing, isn't it? I agree. I moved to France really because I was hoping my children would love France as much as I had growing up, but it was also to work in the wine industry there, and to work and to live surrounded by vineyards. And because I think there's something magical about wine regions. It's to do with the cycle of life, of seasonality is so important. You watch it, you literally watch it through the prism of a vine, of a vineyard, and I love that about it. And
Same.
Again, so connected with the food also in the seasonality. So living here in California, again, I get to watch that around me, just as you do, and I think it's special.
I could not agree with you more. And right now, our region's kind of buzzing because harvest is coming up. And
because of harvest, best season.
Yeah. Yes. And I don't do crap with harvest. I get to take video of all these other people working.
And Trish, Trish, you don't want to. It's
No,
really hard work.
no, I don't.
It's back-breaking, it's sweaty, it's dirty, it's
And earwigs, I cannot do earwigs, Claire. I cannot. I
I'm
cannot.
with you. No, the bugs, the much less romantic side of the
So
real farming.
I've
Real
decided, which I think is brilliant on my part, to stay in my lane and do what I do best and
You are
document
brilliant.
the harvest, right? But no, there is something
Exactly.
so beautiful about this anticipation of the fruit,
Yes.
this years
Yes.
of work, right? Coming off the vine.
Yeah.
And I will
It's
never,
primal.
it
Yeah,
is.
it's primal.
I will
It's
never
it,
take it
it's
for
it, it,
granted.
it no, it taps into our very humanity, into our sort of
Mhm.
source of life, of wanting life, of watching, of generating and movement as well, movement, passage of
Right.
time. It always sort of slightly, I always really admire the vineyard owners, winemakers who have stayed with a property. It's either they've either inherited it or they just happen to have found their sort of their placement, and
Right.
they watch it year after year after year, and then they talk about, this is my 20th vintage or my 25th, and you think, gosh, there we go. It's this sort of beautiful idea of continuation,
I know.
but also the passage of time, which is a little nostalgic as well.
I agree. And you look at these vines that are 20 years old, still
Yeah,
producing this incredible fruit, and you're just,
yeah, yeah,
I am blown away. And I've lived here
yeah.
for 20 years, and I still, when we're driving through, Southern Oregon, and you just these green vines, and there's acres of them. I'm like, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, look, 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 look,
Yeah,
like a
yeah,
kid. And
yeah.
I'm never gonna get sick of it. I'm just not.
No, I don't. No, I don't think I am either. Well, I hope I'm not. And
No,
and I
right.
think the other thing that I find so inspiring always is, opening an older bottle, opening an older vintage, and either sort of, and you open these older wines for all sorts of reasons. Often it's because you've kept it for a special occasion or you've been gifted it, or you're very fortunate and you're asked to taste something a little older. But for those are the moments I think I cherish the most,
Mhm.
because older wines are fragile, just as we become more fragile, and yet they have this extraordinary story to tell. So going back to what we talked about, listening, you can. I know this sounds very fanciful, and I apologize, but you
Nope.
can kind of listen to an old wine, you know, and just find out what it's telling you, and again, let your mind wander to what was happening at that time when that wine was being made. That again is another sort of way of beating time, if you like, or
Mhm.
time traveling. And I have always been fascinated by that piece of wine appreciation as well.
Yeah. Who touched those grapes? Who
Yeah.
put this in
Oh
the
my
bottle?
goodness. I mean, I tasted in Germany. I was telling you, I was at the symposium, and they opened some 1945 Riesling, and you think, at a time when the world, especially Germany, there must have been so much sorrow, so much terrible to even sort of think, and yet here was a wine that was made. Someone made that wine
Right.
through the tears. Someone managed to pick the grapes and make the wine, and I find that powerful. I
Hmm.
find that powerful.
Me too. Me too. We're going to wrap up a little bit and get to the final three, but I have to ask, when you're a long day at work or it's the weekend and you
Yes.
are like, I want a glass of wine, what do you just like? I'm kind of cheating a little bit because this is part of the final three, but what do you just like? What's the wine you're like, your go to?
I don't have a go-to, but it would usually be a chilled wine. So
Hmm.
either a glass of white wine or a glass of rosé, and it would always be dry. So that would be my first choice.
Okay.
And probably something acidity driven,
Mm.
just to give me that sort of, "Oh, okay, remember, Claire, hold yourself up.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all fine. You know, you've done it. You got through. This is going to give you the sort of just a little bit of a stand up
Right.
ovation.
Yeah.
Well
Uh-huh.
done.
I feel that. Your reaction, the judges tasted this rosé bubbles. I believe
Oh,
it was
yes,
from
I
the
love that,
Willamette.
didn't I?
Your
Yes,
reaction was
yes,
priceless. You
yeah,
loved that wine.
I love that. Yes, how exciting to come across again. It's what I love about the unexpected,
Mhm.
or what I love. I love unexpected things. So, and again, wine can do that to you. You're
Yeah.
not you're handed a glass, or you're asked to ask for a comment on a glass, and you think, oh, I'll do my thing, and and then you taste it and go, oh, wow, that's that's got me going.
Mhm.
Something about this that has really intrigued me, or woken me up, or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
yes, I did love that. Bubbles are always good, but
Bubbles.
frankly, yeah,
Bubbles are the best.
not all bubbles are always good,
Right.
but good bubbles
Mhm.
are a great uh, uh, a great start or an end to any evening.
I was in a play in high school and I was supposed to be like kind of a ditzy maid type person and my nickname was Bubbles during that play.
Oh, there we go.
And I love that nickname. All right, Claire
Oh yeah.
Tooley, we are going to wrap up and get to the final three. Best
Okay.
advice you've ever been given.
Well, it's funny. It's funny. We've just been talking about it. So I think one of the best pieces of advice I was given was by a lady in Champagne in 2004. And she said to me, Claire, she said, keep your bubble count high. And I love that, because you can read into it whatever you want, but this idea of keep your bubble count always high is keep your head high, but this idea of and champagne, obviously, if you're offered a glass of champagne, take it.
Yeah, always.
Keep your bubble count high in life.
I have a sticker on my water bottle that says chin up, tits out.
Even better. But and keep your bubble count high.
And that yes. But yeah, I mean it's along the same line, right?
I completely agree. It's it's tough. It's sometimes tough.
Mhm.
So keep it
Yeah.
keep it up.
Keep it up. Keep it up, ladies. Okay. What's your happy place?
Um, okay, so that's quite easy. It's the ocean for me.
Mm.
So which I know it is for many people. That proximity to that, walking along a beach, that proximity to the waves, the sort of enormity of the ocean is something that gets me every time. But it's also, funny enough, I think, connected to my mother. So I mentioned my mother. So I lost her 17 years ago, and she was an extraordinary lady. But she always, when we were growing up, we used to go on holiday to the beach, and she would always say, breathe in, breathe that sea air. So I think that and we always loved her for it, and she would sort of throw her arms up and breathe in. And so I remember that always. I think that's connected, but there is something very, very special for me about the ocean.
Yeah.
So definitely a beach.
I agree. Oregon coast. I don't know if you've seen the Oregon
Oh,
coast.
the Oregon coast is exactly, and that's a sort of perfect example
Hmm.
of this oxygen rich, massive open space. And it's empty. I mean, it was empty when I was there.
Yeah.
It's just this privilege of space.
Agree. Okay. In all things food and drink, what do you crave?
I find this quite a hard question.
I know.
So salinity, salt.
Mm.
I think that for me is something that I'd always go for, and that's obviously I have a sort of never turned down a cashew nut, but but I think oyster, anything that sort of has that saline. Maybe it's the sea thing
Yeah.
going on. I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe it's that. But in wines, it's things like the sort of a Galician Albarino, or a Chablis, or a Sancerre. Something sort of tingly and saline. And so I never have a I rarely, if ever, have a dessert, for example, at a restaurant. Usually because, you get to that point and you've probably eaten too much. But that isn't what interests me. It's always the sort of what's the starter, what's the salty,
the savory,
the savory, but quite sort of quite driven.
Yeah, it's very interesting. People who I do not have a sweet tooth, but people who have sweet tooths, like my husband can eat an entire gallon of ice cream if you let him.
Yeah,
I can't.
Too. Yeah, no, too much, too sweet. And I think that when I moved here, when I moved to the States, I was a little shocked by just how sweet everything seems to be here, including the bread, which I was sort of really nonplussed by to start with. So sugar, I think, is a big deal here, and maybe that's also why I've sort of crave salt, crave salinity.
For sure. Master of Wine, Clare Tooley, I want to thank you so much. You understood the assignment today. You were very not surface, which I appreciate. And not only did you take me somewhere, but you let me in like behind the curtain a little bit. So thank you.
Oh. No, Trish, thank you. I I admire you, and so talking to you has been a real privilege. So thank you so much. Well, I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, yay! Well, I appreciate you sharing your heart and your stories with me, and I'm just, I'm following you on Instagram now, so I'm gonna be listening.
Okay, all right. You'll see all sorts.
You've been listening to Hungry for More, an Epicurean's Dilemma with me, Trish Close. You can watch this podcast and subscribe on my YouTube channel. Just search Hungry for More, an Epicurean's Dilemma. You can also listen and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts.